Hello students, welcome to another class on the growth and development. In the previous class we have discussed the role of growth regulators and their function in the physiological effects or their role on the physiological processes. So in this class, this is another class on growth and development, and in this class we will discuss about 4 different physiological aspects of growth and development, and those are seed germination, seed dormancy, photoperiodism and vernalization. So one by one we will discuss them. So your first one is your seed germination. So what is seed germination? It is the sprouting of seed due to growth and development of embryo to form a seedling. So seed germination is nothing but from seed to seedling, or the process from seed to establishment of seedling is known as the germination. The seed to seed germination, it does not occur in one step. Different physiological reactions and also biochemical reactions occur, then only a seed germinates to seedling. As you know, in case of plants, the seed is formed from the matured ovule, and these ovules are present in the ovary, and the ovary is present in the flower. So flower is the reproductive part of a plant, and it contains both male and female reproductive structures, and the female reproductive structures or the pistil is having ovary inside it, which after pollination and fertilization matures into a fruit. Similarly, the ovules which are present inside the ovary, they are matured into seeds. So before going to the detail of the seed germination, we should know what is the structure of the seeds, or what are the structures present inside a seed. So seed is nothing but a matured ovule, and it is covered with a seed coat. The outer covering of seed is known as seed coat. Seed coat is generally two layered. The outer layer is known as testa and the inner layer is known as the tegmen. The testa is generally a thick layer and the tegmen is generally a thin layer, and inside the seed coat there present the embryo. The embryo is a miniature plant which actually grows into the seedling, and in addition to embryo, the endosperm is present. Endosperm provides the nutrition or the food material for the developing embryo. In some seeds, endosperm may not be present, and those seeds are known as X-albuminous seeds. The seeds where endosperms are present, those seeds are known as albuminous seeds, and where it is absent, they are known as X-albuminous seeds. So embryo is the main structure, or it is the miniature plant which actually germinates to form the seedling. So what are the different structures present inside the embryo? The different structure associated with embryo are your cotyledon, and then the epicotyle, hypocotyle, plumule and radicle. These are some of the important structures associated with the seed. And what is a cotyledon? A cotyledon is known as the seed leaf. As you know, in case of dicot plants, the name suggests that they are having two cotyledons. Di means two. So there are two cotyledons present in dicotyledonous plant. Similarly, in monocotyledonous plant there is only one cotyledon, and in dicotyledonous there are two cotyledons are there. So this cotyledon, its function is to provide nutrition or food for the germinating embryo. So embryo divides and redivides due to some biochemical and physiological processes, then it is established as seedling. So for those divisions, or for those cell divisions, or for those physiological and biochemical reactions, so it needs some food material or nutrition which is provided by the cotyledon. And there are two cotyledons present in dicot plants, and there is only one cotyledon present in the monocot plant. Next comes the epicotyle. What is epicotyle? Epicotyle is that part of the embryo axis which is present just above the point of contact of the cotyledon, and hypocotyle is the part of the embryonal axis which is present just below the point of contact of the cotyledon. So epicotyle present just above the cotyledon contact point, and hypocotyle present below the cotyledon contact point. Then comes the plumule. The plumule is present at the tip of the epicotyle. So, the tip of the epicotyle is known as the plumule, and it is generally present as apical position or terminal position in case of dicot plant, whereas in a monocot plant it is present laterally at the one side or laterally they are present. And this radicle, it is present at the lower part of the hypocotyle. So, plumule is the upper tip of the epicotyle, whereas radicle is the lower tip of the hypocotyle. And when plumule grows, it grows into the grows and gives rise to the shoot system of the seedling or the plant, and the radicle grows to form the root or the root system of the plant. So, plumule gives rise to shoot system, that means the stem and leaf part, and radicle gives rise to the root system of the plant, so that a complete plant will be formed after the seed germination takes place. Clear? So, this is all about the seed structure. Then we should discuss how this germination process occur. The germination process occur through different steps, and the first step is your absorption of water. This absorption of water takes place by the process of imbibition and the osmosis. These two processes are involved for the absorption of water. Imbibition, the water is imbibed just by the adsorbing surface, and also due to the osmotic differences or osmotic potential differences, also water is absorbed inside the seed, and by absorbing water the seeds they swell. The swelling of seeds occur, and side by side the seed coat is softened. The seed coat generally it is a hard, the testa is a hard structure, it is a thick structure, so it has to be softened so that the embryo can break it and grow out of it, so that a seedling can be formed. So, by absorbing water, swelling of seed occurs, and also the softening of the seed coat occurs. Then the embryo becomes hydrated. By absorbing water, the embryo which was in a dry condition inside the seed previously, it becomes hydrated. So, due to hydration of the embryo, there increase the physiological activity, and which is indicated by the increase in your respiration process. So, the increase in respiration processes means the cells they are actively participating in the process of germination, and the enzymes are also synthesized, because you know all enzymes they work in a water medium. So, when water enters into the seed, the enzymes they are also formed, and for formation of these enzymes your hormone gibberellin plays an important role, and after that other hormones are also formed and they help in the germination process. These enzymes, these are known as the hydrolyzing enzymes. These are known as the hydrolyzing enzymes, means they convert the complex food material which are present inside the cell, inside the seed, they convert it into the usable form or the simpler form. Generally, the seeds of the most of the plant they store food material in form of carbohydrates, lipids and proteins. Minerals and vitamins are also present. Suppose these carbohydrates, lipids and proteins they are present in a very complex form, and they have to be converted into simpler one or the usable form, so that they can be utilized by the growing embryo. And this conversion of complex food to the simpler one is known as mobilization of the reserve. So, this is very important physiological aspect of the seed germination process. So, what is mobilization of the reserve? The complex food material they are acted upon by the hydrolyzing enzymes which are formed and converted into simpler forms, which provide the energy as well as the building material for the growing cells of the embryo. And here the gibberellic acids or the gibberellin hormone, plant hormone, it plays an important role for synthesizing these hydrolyzing enzymes. So, gibberellin helps the synthesis of hydrolyzing enzymes, and these hydrolyzing enzymes, for example, they are amylase, protease, lipase, etc., and they convert the complex food material like starch, proteins and lipids into simple ones. For example, the starch is converted into glucose by the enzyme amylase. Similarly, proteins are converted into amino acids by the enzyme proteases, and the lipids are converted into the simpler forms, they are the fatty acid and glycerol by the enzyme lipases, and all these enzymes are known as hydrolyzing enzymes, and these are formed due to the action of the hormone gibberellin inside the growing embryo, and all these reactions together known as mobilization of the reserves. So after this simpler form of food material they are formed, they are being utilized by the growing embryo. So inside the germinating seeds there are actually two centers of activity. So one is your the food material which are present in cotyledon or endospore. In some seeds both cotyledon and endospores are present. In some seeds only cotyledon is there, and these are provide the food material, and this food material they undergo the mobilization process and they are converted into simple ones. They are transmitted to the growing axis of the embryo, and there the another center of activity that is known as the embryo or the growth centers of the embryo, they by utilizing these simpler form of food they divide and redivide, they grow and form the seedling. Then the food materials are available. After the food materials are available by the process of mobilization of the reserve, the cell starts dividing in the growing part, that is the radicle and plevole. As I have already told you, the radicle is the first one, it gives rise to the root system, and it is the first part of the embryo which emerges out of the seed coat, what comes out of the seed coat. And since it is positively geotropic means the direction of growth of the radicle is in the direction of gravity, that means downwards. So it goes downwards and towards the soil. Then further expansion of the embryo occurs. After radicle emerges out, embryo also grows further, and by growth of the embryo the seed coat ruptures. You see here the seed coat, the outer covering of the seed it ruptures, and the plumule comes out of the cell. The plumule comes out of the cell, and this growth of the plumule either it takes place due to the rapid growth of hypocotyle or epicotyle. In some seeds the hypocotyle elongates, in some seeds the epicotyle elongates, so that the plumule comes out of the seed and it grows above the soil. And after formation of radicle which grows into the root system of the plant, and also the plumule forms the shoot system of the plant, a complete seedling is formed, and the seed is now established as seedling. With this the process of seed germination is completed. Then there are different types of seed germination, as we have discussed that sometimes the growth of the plumule it depends upon either the elongation of hypocotyle or the elongation of the epicotyle. Accordingly, there are two different types of germination on the behavior of the cotyledon. In some seeds you find the cotyledon comes out of the soil, or it grows above the soil, whereas in some seeds or in some plants the cotyledons remains underground or under the soil. So accordingly the seed germination types are of generally two main types are there. One is called epigeal germination, another is called hypogeal germination. And in addition to these two types, there is a special type of germination which is known as the viviparous germination. So let us discuss it in detail. First is your epigeal and hypogeal germination. So in epigeal germination the cotyledons raised out of the soil. You see the name epigeal, epi means above and geon means soil. So above the soil, who is above the soil? Cotyledon is raised above the soil. Why this cotyledon raised above the soil? Because due to the rapid extension of hypocotyle before the growth of the epicotyle. So before the epicotyle grows, the hypocotyle it grows extensively, so that it pushes the cotyledon above the soil. That's why the cotyledon become above the soil, and the type of germination is known as the epigeal. and this type of germination is observed in plants like bean, castor, tamarind, mustard, etc. Similarly, come to the hypogeal germination. Here the cotyledon remains underground, because hypo means below and geon means soil. So, here cotyledon remain below the soil, so that's why it is called as the hypogeal germination, because hypocotyle growth is restricted. The difference between epigeal and hypogeal germination, it often comes in examination. The main difference is the hypocotyle, here it shows the rapid extension of growth, and here it remain the growth is remain restricted. And due to the hypocotyle restriction growth, and the epicotyle grows here to raise the first leaves, that means the cotyledons. The epicotyle grows to push the cotyledons above the soil, and the epicotyle grows to raise the first leaves of the soil, you see. So, here the epicotyle elongates to bring the first leaf of this plant above the soil. That is why the cotyledon remain inside the soil or underground. So, since it is the cotyledon remain underground, it is called as the hypogeal germination. But in epigeal germination, the hypocotyle elongates so that the cotyledon comes out of the soil. And hypogeal type of germination found in the plants like gram, pea, mango, maize, etc. So, you have to give 2 or 3 examples of each type. And there is a third and special type of germination known as the viviparous germination. The meaning of viviparous means the germination while it is still attached with the parent plant. So, always the seeds, they are germinated when they dispersed from the parent plant, but here the seeds, they get germinated while they are attached with the parent plant. So, this is a special type of germination, and this special type of germination occur in mangrove plants. And you know, mangrove plants, they generally grow in salty lakes and marshy areas or sea coasts. Near the sea they are found, and there the seed germinates where still attached to the parent plant. You see, these are the fruits of mangrove plants, and here you see the radicle of the seed comes out of the fruit while the fruit is still attached with the plant, and the embryo emerges out of the fruit with a massive radicle. That means it is having a large weight. Massive radicle, it emerges out of the embryo and it pointing downwards. So, due to this increased weight or the massiveness of this embryo, the radicle, the seedling separates from the parent plant and it fall down, and there itself in the muddy soil it establishes as a seedling. So, this is a very special type of germination found in mangrove plants. For example, your Rhizophora. So, you see these are mangrove plants. So, these are the fruits and the radicle, they have emerged out of the embryo and they fall and they germinate. There itself they germinate to give rise to a seedling. It is the viviparous type of germination. The next comes here the factors. What are the factors or the conditions needed or suitable for a seed germination process? Both external factors and internal factors are there which affect the seed germination process. External factors like water, oxygen, temperature and light, they affect the process. Similarly, the internal factors like seed dormancy and seed viability, they also affect this process. So, what are the external factors? We will discuss in detail. So, seed germination depends upon several external factors, and these factors only they determine whether the seed will germinate or not. The first important factor it is your water, because the first process of seed germination is water absorption. So, water is needed because by absorbing water only the seed coat becomes soft, and that allows the embryo to come out of it. Unless the seed coat is soft, the embryo cannot come out of it. So, they have to be soft by absorbing water. That is why water is needed. And water also serves as a medium of enzyme action. As I have already told you, the enzymes they act only in a water medium or in a hydrated condition. So water is needed for the enzyme action, because without enzymes these complex food cannot be converted into simple ones. So enzymes action needs the water. Then another function of water is the concentrated food they are converted into simple ones by the hydrolyzing enzymes which act only in a water medium. Then comes the factor oxygen. As you know, oxygen is generally needed for your respiration, and respiration is needed by the sea, because embryo resumes growth during germination, and for this energy is required, because embryo has to be grow, and it has to be divide and redivide. For all these processes it needs some energy, and without energy embryo cannot grow, and this energy comes from the food material which is stored inside the seed, and this food material they undergo oxidation, and then only they can provide energy. So for oxidation oxygen is needed. Then the temperature. You know, all these physiological activities they are affected by temperature and also the seed germination, and the optimum temperature range for seed germination is 25 to 30 degrees centigrade. Within this range of temperature the suitable germination occurs, and most of the seeds they fail to germinate below 0 degree centigrade and above 48 degree centigrade. These are the two extreme range of temperature below which seed germination generally not takes place, and above 48 degree also, at high temperature also seed germination cannot take place. Below temperature below 0 degree centigrade enzymes become inactive, and above 48 degree centigrade enzyme they get degraded, they are destroyed, so germination process cannot occur. Then the last factor, external factor, that is known as the light. Light generally it is not considered as a very essential factor, but some plants they need light for their germination, some plants they do not. Accordingly seeds are of 2-3 types. Positively photoblastic means those seeds which need light for their germination, for example lettuce seeds. Similarly some seeds they do not germinate in the presence of light, for example pumpkin, and other seeds they are neutral to the light, that means whether light is present or not they will germinate. They are known as photoplastic neutral seeds, for example like cucumber and the tomato. Then comes the internal factors. Two internal factors are there, known as seed viability and the seed dormancy. Seed viability, it is the capacity of mature seeds to germinate, it is their capacity, and seeds remain viable, and at the end of the viable period it becomes dead and lost the capacity of germination. So seeds they germinate within their viable period, and their viability is maintained if they are stored properly. That means how they should be stored? They should be stored in a very dry condition, and they should be free from insects, they should be free from fungi, and in these conditions their viability remains. Another factor is your seed dormancy. This is the inability on the part of the embryo to germinate under the suitable condition. Even if the suitable conditions are available, they do not germinate because they need a period of rest. So that is known as the seed dormancy, and seed dormancy occurs due to many reasons, and dormant seeds they germinate only when these causes of dormancy are removed. And seed dormancy will discuss later, just next to it in detail. So with this the seed germination is completed, and let us discuss the seed dormancy. What is seed dormancy? First, seed dormancy, it is the innate inhibition of germination of viable seed even placed in most favorable environment for the germination. That means even if you provide the seeds the most favorable conditions, you provide water, you provide oxygen or light, whether it is required, suitable temperature, and the viable seed is there, still they will not germinate. So this is their innate inhibition of germination. This is known as the seed dormancy. And what are the causes of seed dormancy? The Bewley and Black have identified two causes. The dormancy may be due to the seed coat or it may be due to the condition of the embryo. So, let us see these causes. So, immaturity of the embryo after ripening, hard seed coat, all these are due to the causes due to the seed coat. So, immaturity of embryo means in some plants embryo is immature at the time of seed dispersal, embryo is not matured and immature embryo cannot germinate. Thus, the seeds remain dormant till the embryo becomes mature. After that only they will germinate. For example, in the plant it is seen ranunculus, and another cause is there after ripening. What is after ripening? Some seeds they need a period of rest after their maturity, and this period is known as the after ripening. So, after completing this period they will germination will be possible in these seeds like wheat, oat and barley. They need a after ripening period within which the embryo matures. Then the hard seed coat. In some plants you find the seed coat are very hard. If the hard coat, the seed is having hard seed coat, then it will be very difficult for the embryo to come out of it. For example, you see in these seeds, you see here it is known as the macadamia, here also walnut, almond, they are there. The seeds they are having very hard seed coat. So, it is very difficult for the embryo to come out of this hard seed coat. Okay. And for example, like xanthium and lepidium, they are having hard seed coat, that is why the embryo do not germinate. Another cause is the impermeable seed coat. Sometimes the seed coat they are impermeable to water and also gases like oxygen, they are impermeable, and this makes the germination impossible. That is why dormancy occurs. For example, in case of legumes and also in apples. Then the last one is your germination inhibitors. Actually, these are the chemical compounds present inside the seed which inhibit the process of germination, and these are the abscisic acid, which is a hormone we have discussed in the last class. Then the phenolic acid, coumarin, ferulic acids. So, these are the chemical compounds which inhibit the germination process, and they are found in plants like iris, xanthium, cucurbita, apple, etc., and they inhibit germination. That is why they are known as germination inhibitors. If these germination inhibitors are removed, then only they germinate. So, these are the causes of the seed dormancy. So, how to break dormancy or seed dormancy so that they can germinate? Seeds can they can be their dormancy can be broken both by naturally or by artificially. How to break the dormancy naturally? In nature, seed dormancy is broken automatically in nature, that is due to the growth hormones. For example, growth hormones like gibberellin, cytokinin, mainly gibberellin, they help in breaking the dormancy so that the seeds can germinate. And after the maturation and after ripening of the embryo, where it is needed, the seeds also germinate. And in some plants, the weakening of impermeable and hard seed coats, if hard seed coats by some means they are softened, then also the dormancy is broken and germination takes place. This process of weakening the impermeable and hard seed coats, they may be due to the microbial action, that means due to some microbial or bacterial or fungal action, or it may be due to abrasion, or it may be due to passage through the digestive system of some animals. Due to all these, the hard seed coat becomes soft or permeable, so that the germination can take place or the dormancy can be removed. Then the artificial method of breaking dormancy, these are the scarification, stratification and counteracting inhibitors, and also shaking and the pressure. What is scarification? It is any process of breaking or scratching or mechanically altering the seed coat. The scarification acts on the hard seed coat so that it is permeable to water and gases, and this process is called scarification. And this scarification, it may be caused due to, it may be due to mechanical or thermal or chemical processes. So these are the some of the scarification processes. You can use a file to make the hard seed coat soft, or you can use the acid like sulfuric acid you can use, so that hard seed coat becomes soft. And also by using a knife, the seeds are nicked and soaked in hot water, or you can use a sandpaper also. By using all these methods, scarification of seeds occur, due to which the hard seed coat they become soft, and the dormancy is removed. Then stratification. In stratification, the seeds are exposed to water and oxygen for a variable period of either in low temperature or in high temperature. Then these counteracting inhibitors, those germinating inhibitors which are present, if they are counteracted by some chemicals like potassium nitrate, thiourea, ethylene, chlorohydrin, these chemicals actually they inhibit the germination, they inhibit the germinatory inhibitors, or they counteract their inhibitory action and break the dormancy. Then by using shaking and pressure, various shaking and applying pressure methods are there. They are used to weaken the seed coat, thereby induce the germination. So these are the artificial breaking methods of breaking dormancy. Then what is the significance of seed dormancy? Whether seed dormancy is beneficial or it is always harmful for plant. The seed dormancy, it helps in perennation of the plant. So what is this? So seed dormancy allows the seeds to pass through the environmental conditions like drought, cold, or any unfavorable conditions. So those unfavorable conditions in which the seeds should not germinate, so due to this dormant period, that can be overcome. Then the storage. So because of this dormancy, the seeds they are able to be stored. So human beings, they can store these seeds because they are having a dormant period, so that they are available throughout the year, and they are transported to other places without any difficulty, where they are not found or where the areas of their deficiency. Due to due to the dormancy or the dormancy of the seeds, only they can be available throughout the year of the to the human beings. Then dispersal. This seed dormancy is also needed for the seed dispersal, because for dispersal they need some time. So that time may be the seed dormant period. Okay. So this is all about the seed dormancy. We will discuss the next physiological aspects of growth and development, that is known as the photoperiodism. So what is photoperiodism? As you know, photo means light and period means duration. Duration, the time period. So photoperiod means it is the daily duration of light, or it is also known as the variation in day length. It is called as photoperiod. Then what is photoperiodism? Photoperiodism is the effect of photoperiod on the growth and development processes, especially the flowering processes. It is known as the photoperiodism. When the duration of light they affect the flowering process, that is known as your photoperiodism. It was first studied by Garner and Allard in 1920. And as you know, every flowering plant, it is having two phases. One is called vegetative phase, when the vegetative parts like roots, stems and leaves, they grow fully, and at certain period the reproductive part it grows, that is the flower. Flower grows at a particular time. Flower does not grow from the very beginning of the plant growth. After a certain period of vegetative growth only flowers they develop, and under an appropriate photoperiod or day length, the plant switches from vegetative period to the reproductive stage, and there they respond the synthesis of some hormone, and subsequently these hormones are translocated to the buds or the flowering region. Then only flowering occurs. These flowering plants actually they are divided into three different types according to their photoperiodic response, and these are divided into short day plants or SDP, long day plants or LDP, and day neutral plants or DNP. So, what are the short day plants? Those plants which flower when their day length is shorter than a certain critical photoperiodic length. So, what is a critical photoperiod? I will tell you just after this. So, when the plants they flower only when the day length is shorter than the critical day length, then they are known as the short day plants. And the critical day length varies in different species because it is species specific. In different plants, the critical photoperiod is different. So, short day plants examples are chrysanthemum, bryophyllum, dahlia, rice, soybean, xanthium, etc. Similarly, there are long day plants. These are the plants which flower only when the day length is longer than the critical photoperiod or critical day length, and this value also varies from species to species. The long day plants, they are also known as the short night plants. Similarly, short day plants are known as the long night plants. The short day, long day and short night plants. The example of LDP or long day plants, these are the barley, lettuce, wheat, oat, potato, etc. Then comes the day neutral plants. These are the plants which are independent of the day length or photoperiod. Whatever they may be the photoperiod, they will flower. So, these are the day neutral plants or DNP. The examples are cotton, sunflower, tomato, maize, cucumber, etc. So, plants have been divided into three types according to their photoperiodic response, and here we have discussed that this depends upon the critical day length or the critical photoperiod, which is very much important. So, what is the critical day length or critical photoperiod? So, while studying this effect of day length on flowering, Garner and Allard, they found that there is certain critical factor or some critical photoperiod is there which affect the flowering process, and the plants would flower only if they are exposed to light for less or more than this critical photoperiod. Some plants they need less than this critical photoperiod, some plants they need a day length more than this critical photoperiod. So, accordingly they are known as short day plants and long day plants. So, you can define the critical photoperiod or critical day length as it is that continuous direction of light which must not be exceeded by the short day plants. That means it must not be exceeded by the short day plants. Short day plants do not exceed that critical factor, and it is always be exceeded in long day plants in order to bring them to flower. So, for flowering, the short day plants they should not exceed the critical day length, and the long day plants they can always exceed the critical day length. Then after this, some research found that dark period is also important. So, here you see this image shows how the long day, short day and day neutral plants they depend upon the critical photoperiod. In long day plants, when the critical photoperiod is above it, then only they flower, whereas in short day plants, when the critical photoperiod is below it, then only they flower. If the above critical photoperiod, then there is no flowering. If the day length is below the critical photoperiod, then only they flower in case of short day plants, whereas in day neutral plants, so there is no effect of the photoperiod. So, after the critical photoperiod, some research found that the dark period is also very much important or crucial in the flowering process, because the flowering is inhibited in short day plants if the dark period is interrupted by a brief exposure to light, because their flowering is actually promoted by long continuous dark period. Thus, they are also known as long night plants. Here you see in this image, so these short day plants. So, this is the photoperiod for short day plants, and this shows the critical night length. Just like critical day length, this is the critical night length. And the short day plants only flower when there is a when the dark period is continuously or dark period is more, then only there is flowering occurs. And when this dark period is interrupted by a very small flash of light also, they will not flower. That means for flowering their dark period should not be interrupted in case of short day plants. Similarly, the long day plants can flower only when the dark period is interrupted, and some even flower under continuous light. You see, in long day plants, this is the critical night length, and they flower when there is continuous light and the night length is shorter, and they will not flower when there is continuous night length or continuous dark. If this dark period, this continuous dark period is interrupted by a flash of light, then also they can flower. Some long day plants even flower in the continuous presence of light. So what we have understood, that the long day plants, they need a continuous light duration for their flowering, whereas the short day plants, they need a continuous dark period. For short day plants, dark period is more important. For long day plants, the light period is more important. Clear? Then comes the, what is the chemical present in the plant which actually receives this photoperiodic stimulus? Who receives this? The region of photoperiodic stimulus for flowering is the leaf. Actually, leaf is the organ which receives the photoperiodic stimulus or light for flowering, and when subjected to necessary photoperiod only, then only the that induce the growing points to flower. And this photoperiodic induction occurs only when the plant acquires a certain vegetative growth. If sufficient vegetative growth is not there, then plant will not accept or receive the photoperiodic stimulus, and there will be no flowering. So, and the chemical which actually receives this photoperiodic stimulus, it is known as the photoreceptor, and this particular chemical is known as the phytochrome, which is a blue colored cytoplasmic chromoprotein. That means it is a pigment molecule, just like your chlorophyll. It absorbs light at certain wavelength, and these are green in color. So this phytochrome pigment, it is a blue colored pigment, and it also absorbs light at certain wavelength. And there are two different forms of phytochromes are there, because they absorb light at different wavelength. They are known as PR and PFR form. The PR means the phytochrome red. That means this particular form, it absorbs light at the red region, that is known as the 660 nanometer. This is the wavelength of that red light which is absorbed by the phytochrome red pigment. Similarly, another form of the phytochrome is known as PFR, that is phytochrome far red pigment, which absorbs light at the 740 nanometer. And these two forms are interconvertible. That means PR is converted to PFR by absorbing red light or sunlight. Similarly, PFR can be converted into PR by absorbing far red light, or in darkness also they are slowly converted into PR form. And you see, this PR form, it stimulates flowering in short day plants, where it inhibits the flowering long day plants. Similarly, the PFR form of phytochrome, it stimulates flowering in long day plants, whereas it inhibits flowering in short day plants. So phytochrome is the pigment molecule which actually receives the photoperiodic stimulus, and according to the activation of the form of phytochrome, the flowering occurs in SDP, short day plants, and long day plants. If you a grafting experiment is done between the plant which is having a suitable photoperiod and the plants without any photoperiod, then what we will observe, that suppose this is the first plant which has received the photoperiodic stimulus in this leaf, and these are the plants grafted to it. So what it is observed, that not only this plant next to this first plant, but all these plants, they can be flower, or flowering can occur on all these plants. only you see this first plant has received the photoperiodic stimulus, but all these plants which are grafted to it, they can also induce to flower. So this indicates that certain hormone is that must be produced in the first plant, which are transmitted to the grafted plant and induce the flowering. And this hormone is known as your florigen, which induce flowering. This florigen is formed after receiving the required photoperiod in the leaves. The leaves actually they receive the required photoperiod, and there it produced in the leaf, the florigen hormone is produced, and it is transported through the phloem to the growing tips or branches where the actual flowering takes place. And florigen hormone, it is actually a theorized hormone, hypothetical hormone, because till now it has not been isolated, and it is theorized that the gibberellin like hormone, they are converted into florigen and under suitable condition of light and temperature. So during the photosynthesis, some precursor of gibberellin like hormones are produced, and this gibberellin like hormone gives rise to the florigen. It is all hypothesis. It is hypothetical or theorized. Till now it is not established that what type of chemical is florigen, but it is known that florigen is produced due to the photoperiodic stimulus received by the leaf and which is transmitted to the growing tips and where flowering takes place. So to sum up this process, what we have understood that the two form of phytochrome, one is PFR. When PFR builds up by the PR is converted into PFR by observing sunlight or red light, it induces the florigen which is activated in long day plants and flowering occurs. Similarly, when PFR is converted into PR form, so florigens are activated in short day plants, that leads to the flowering. So PFR form induce flowering in LDP and PR form induce flowering in SDP. What is the importance of this process or photoperiodism? The knowledge of photoperiodic effect is useful in keeping some plants in vegetative growth where they are required to obtain higher yield of tuber, rhizomes, etc., and or keep the plant in reproductive stage to yield more flowers and fruits. If you are having the photoperiodic or photoperiodism in a particular plant, then you can keep them either in a vegetative stage where the vegetative parts are required. So for example, some plants we need their tubers or rhizomes, these are the vegetative parts, and in some plants we need the fruits and flowers, those are the reproductive parts. By knowing the photoperiodism of these particular plants, we can keep them either in vegetative stage or in reproductive stage, and a plant can be made to flower throughout the year under greenhouse condition in favorable photoperiod being provided to it, and this has been used by the commercial growers to meet the market demand for vegetables and flowers. So these plants, they flower only in a certain season of a year, but by providing the artificial the photoperiod in a greenhouse condition or controlled condition, you can make them flower throughout the year, and which can meet the market demands of vegetables and flowers. Then plant breeders use this photoperiodic knowledge to crossbreed plants which normally develop flowers in different seasons. If the plant breeders want to cross two plants, between two plants, and if they flower in different seasons, that will be difficult for the plant breeders to cross these two plants. So they have to be flower at the same time. So by providing or by knowing this photoperiodic knowledge of a particular plant, they can the two plants, they can be made to flower at the same time, so that the cross breeding experiment can possible between them. And the knowledge of photoperiodism in relation to flowering is also helpful in laying out gardens, orchards, and planting crop pattern of an area. So to make a garden or orchard, you should know the photoperiodic periodism in the particular plant which you want to grow in that garden or orchard. So that helps in making a garden or orchard. So these are the importance of photoperiodism. Then another physiological aspect which we will discuss, the last one for discussion, it is the vernalization. What is vernalization? Vernalization is a process by which some plant they need some low temperature treatment for their flowering. For their flowering they need a cold temperature or low temperature before flowering occurs, so that they can flower. The requirement of low temperature treatment for accelerating flowering is known as the vernalization. And many plants they do not come to flower before experience a low temperature, and these plants remain vegetative during the warm season, receive the cold temperature or low temperature during the winter, grow further, and then they bear flowers and fruits. And this condition occur in winter varieties of some annual plants like wheat, barley and rye. Similarly, some biennial plants also like cabbage, sugar beet and carrot, they also show this type of condition where they receive the low temperature treatment in one season, and after they grow and then they flower. So, they need two different time period or two different seasons for their flowering. So, this happens naturally, but if you supply or if you provide them low temperature artificially, then they can be made to flower in one season. So, this vernalization process, it was the scientist Lysenko, who was a Russian scientist, he found that the cold requiring annual and biennial plants can be made to flower in one growing season by artificially providing low temperature treatment to young plants or to the seeds, and this he called it the vernalization process. So, you can define vernalization as the process of shortening a vegetative phase and hastening the flowering by a previous cold treatment. Clear? So, to understand this, that some plants they need some low temperature treatment before flowering. So, in one season they receive the low temperature, then they grow, after that they flower. Clear? And if those plants artificially provided with low temperature treatment, then their vegetative period will be less, and their flowering period will be they will hasten or increase. Okay. Then Lysenko he proposed that there are two phases of vernalization. One is known as the photo phase, another is known as the thermo phase. The thermo phase requires a temperature varying between 10 to 20 degrees centigrade. So, thermo phase means the temperature requirement, which is 10 to 20 degrees centigrade together with the moisture and oxygen, and this phase has to be completed before the initiation of the reproductive organ, that is the flower. Then comes the photo phase. A thermo phase has to be always followed by the photo phase, photo phase or the phase of the light or illumination. Without followed by an illumination period, the vernalization cannot be completed. So, this shows the effect of vernalization in a plant. Suppose you take a slightly germinated seed, and here in one you do not provide the cold temperature and you put it in the soil. So, this will take some time to flower. So, flowering is not seen immediately, but this same germinating seed, if it is chilled for a month or it is provided with low temperature for a month at 5 degrees Celsius and then planted at ordinary temperature, you see flowering occurs within a very short period of time. So, this shows how the vernalization affect the flowering process. And this stimulus of vernalization or cold treatment, it is received by the meristematic cells, just like your florizon, your photoperiodic stimulus is received by leaf. Similarly, here the cold treatment stimulus, it is received by the meristematic cells of the growing tip, like the shoot tip, root tip, embryo tip and the young leaves, etc. And when suppose you graft a vernalized plants, a plant which is treated with cold temperature with another unvernalized plant, then what will observe? They both of them will flower. That means this shows that some hormone is produced inside this vernalized plant due to this cold stimulus or low temperature treatment, which is transmitted to the other plant and induce it to flower. So, there is a hormone responsible for this cold temperature treatment, and that hormone is known as the Vernalin. Vernalin is the hormone which is produced in the low temperature treatment. In the process of low temperature treatment, a hypothetical hormone Vernalin is produced. Vernalin has never been isolated from the plant. Just like Florigen, it is also a hypothesized hormone. Till now, it has not been isolated, and it is believed that Vernalin is a gibberellin actually, because it has been observed that vernalized plants, they have higher amount of gibberellin than the unvernalized plant. That is why it is thought that it may be one type of gibberellin. The Vernalin synthesis helps in the synthesis of Florigen, which is known as the flowering hormone. Then it stimulates the flowering process. And what is the importance of vernalization? Vernalization is beneficial in reducing the period between germination and flowering. That is nothing but your vegetative period, that we have already discussed, because these vernalized, the plants which need a low temperature treatment, actually they need the low temperature treatment in one season, then they grow and then flower. So they need a longer vegetative period, but this can be reduced by applying the vernalization or by low temperature treatment. So more than one crop can be obtained in a year. So they will not two different seasons, in one season only you can get the crop. By sowing winter crops in spring, plants can be protected from freezing injury due to very low temperature, low winter temperature. So you need not grow these plants in winter season, because you can grow them in spring season, and artificially you provide them low temperature so that they will not be harmed due to the freezing injury, which is due to the winter low temperature. But due to low temperature, this freezing injury occurs, but if you avoid it by growing these plants in spring season and artificially providing them low temperature, then that will be overcome. So these are the importance of vernalization. So with this we come to an end of this lecture. We have discussed the 4 different types of physiological processes: germination, dormancy, photoperiod and vernalization. I think you must have a good understanding over it. So students, wish you all a very happy virtual learning, and thank you and goodbye.